There's a hearing happening on Capitol Hill right at this very moment. The House DOJ panel is questioning NPR and PBS executives over their alleged bias and whether taxpayers should be funding their newsrooms. The CEO of NPR made a revealing admission during the hearing. Let's listen.
Now you are here managing NPR, which is in part federally funded. Can we expect that you will bring the same lack of reverence for truth to your management of NPR?
Thank you, Congressman. First of all, I do want to say that NPR acknowledges that we were mistaken in failing to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story more aggressively and sooner. Our current editorial leadership.
In Wuhan?
We recognize that we were reporting at the time, but we acknowledge that the new CIA evidence is worthy of coverage and have covered it.
Yuri Berliner, a former NPR employee, is arguing that the news outlet should not take the federal funds.
He writes for the Free Press, the broadcaster needs to stop pretending it's a network for all of America and become the progressive institution it truly wants to be. Berliner also points out that NPR says federal funding only accounts for just 5% of annual revenues anyway. So that was an important admission from Katherine Maher, someone I've criticized a great deal over the years. She's kind of one of those anti-disinformation thinkers who seems to not have as much reverence as I would like for the First Amendment, which does protect incorrect speech, false speech, alleged misinformation, because, as was the case with NPR's coverage of these two important stories, the Hunter Biden laptop and the lab leak, they initially succumbed to the popular mainstream expert consensus that the Hunter Biden laptop story was fake or some kind of Russian hoax. That is not the case. And then also that you are a racist conspiracy theorizer for thinking that maybe COVID came from a lab. Now we know that that is the leading explanation of at least 3 different government agencies. It shows that just succumbing to groupthink can have downsides. Just automatically believing or repurposing whatever the elite progressive consensus is can be damaging and erodes these institutions as kind of neutral arbiters that are getting taxpayer funding. Now, I would absolutely strip them of taxpayer funding. You're not going to be surprised to hear me say that at all. And then they can be as progressive or single-minded as they want to be, but as long as they're on the taxpayer the grain dole, I think they have some obligation to be a little bit more neutral in their coverage.
Well, I agree with the employee who said, what do we need those funds for? It's 5% of our funding. Let's just be who we really want to be. Everybody, to me, it brings up what's going on over at Columbia. In exchange for that $400 million, the things that they're caving to are so horrifying to me. Number one, first of all, this business about in Columbia that they need to fight anti-Semitism. This kind of behavior will actually make anti-Semitism increase, I believe. But the worst part of it is that in exchange for that $400 million, they will now take into academic receivership 3 of the departments at Columbia, both Middle Eastern Studies, African Studies, and Asian Studies. That is such a complete surrender of academic freedom. So here, just don't take the government's money. Just don't. I would bet for that $400
Hell yeah.
million, you could have Columbia alum who could come together, some of those guys within 2 or 3 weeks, they'd have your $400 million. So if the government wants to tell NPR what to put for their 5% of their funding, then I say I agree with the guy who says then let the government keep its money on that case. I'll tell you,
Columbia University.
I give $25. I think a lot of people would say if NPR came out nationally and said in order for us to be who we actually are, we have to say no to the 5% of our funding, and then for them to say this is what that 5% represents, and let's have a fundraising campaign. That sounds good.
To your point, Columbia's endowment is $15 billion.
I know, but I said that recently. I said to somebody, because I've been posting about that, for that $14 billion, why do they need that measly $400 million? Somebody else said to me, well, it's not an ATM. But that's why my point was, then ask your alum. There are many Columbia alum. This is ridiculous, the idea that everybody's, but the government's going to give me money. This is where you and I would agree. To hell with the government's money.
Yes, good. Glad to hear it.
In a whole different way, though.
Also, I see some Democrats are defending NPR along the lines of, or PBS, excuse me, because of the importance of programming, for educational programming for children. And I understand that it
PBS
provides
is different than NPR.
It provides important educational programming for children, but Marianne, we're now living in a world where YouTube has so much free, terrific educational programming for kids.
Are you trying
And
to take away Sesame
literally
Street, Robby?
everybody.
Are you trying to take away? No, Robby,
Oh,
no.
I'm kicking Elmo out onto the street. I'm
No, now you're
sorry,
getting into the
Oscar.
sacred.
I'm
It shall not be
sorry,
allowed.
Big Bird. It's all gotta go. He can tickle somebody else. It's not gonna be my tax dollars. But I'm saying the exact same thing that.
But I said from the other side.
Yeah, but
PBS to me is different than NPR.
But what vital service does it provide that can't be provided by the children's programming on YouTube?
I'm not sure. Well, specifically, I would have to look more specifically in order to see. But usually, when you're talking about something like PBS Productions, you're talking about a high level of production value that would
YouTube production value. I mean, not to look at our production
yeah,
values.
but look
so
at the company that owns this. Well, YouTube,
Yeah.
but look at the company that owns a major corporate conglomerate.
Yeah.
So that's different.
I don't know. Some of these independent content creators have a really impressive and make a lot of money doing it, by the way. And their revenue stream is the ads that plays on YouTube. And
I'm not willing to
that's fine.
surrender on children's programming on PBS. We could do a deeper dive, actually, and perhaps we should, on what exactly PBS does. There's a lot of stuff on PBS.
I think kids
that
could
is
watch
not,
this
you wouldn't see
program
it on
and they'd get
YouTube,
educated.
Masterpiece Theater. No, PBS
No.
is definitely, to me, I'm glad for my taxpayer money, Robby, to help fund PBS. When it comes to NPR, go do your thing. Be who you really are. There are too many people on the left who are so afraid to be who we really are. And sometimes it's people on our own side who are trying to squash us. Sometimes it's something like, in this case, the government funding. But if the left doesn't start being who we really are and saying what we really believe, then the American people won't recognize that we're the ones with the better ideas.
I am fine to have left-leaning people say what they really believe loudly as possible. I give them the floor. Please proclaim it, and we'll see if that message resonates with people.
Okay, we all agree.
Up next, Greenland. Much ado about Greenland. We will talk to you about that. Stay tuned. More Rising in just a minute.